The $30 million mansion had been silent for 14 months, until she pressed play on a simple song, and the impossible happened. 6-year-old Noah Kane, the billionaire's son who hadn't spoken a word since his mother's tragic death, began to hum, softly at first, then stronger, as if a dam had finally broken inside his wounded heart. His father stood frozen in the doorway, briefcase forgotten, watching a miracle unfold. The woman they'd hired as just another nanny had just done what Harvard specialists and world-renowned doctors couldn't. But this was only the beginning of a love story that would shatter every rule, defy every expectation, and prove that sometimes the most broken souls create the most beautiful music together. How did a nanny from Brooklyn unlock the voice that grief had stolen, and what happened when their impossible love threatened to destroy everything they'd fought to build? Hit subscribe if you believe in miracles, and let me know in the comments, what's the most powerful song that ever changed your life? Because this story will remind you that love, like music, has the power to heal what seems forever broken. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The mahogany floors of the Kane mansion gleamed like mirrors, reflecting nothing but emptiness. 6-year-old Noah Kane sat in the corner of his palatial playroom, surrounded by toys worth more than most people's cars, yet his small hands remained motionless. The Ferrari ride-on car sat untouched. The custom-built castle with real drawbridge collected dust. Even the life-size stuffed giraffe his father's assistant had purchased from FAO Schwartz last week couldn't coax a smile from the boy's pale lips. Alexander Kane stood in the doorway, his steel-gray eyes studying his son like a puzzle he couldn't solve. At 34, Alexander commanded boardrooms with the same ease most people ordered coffee. His empire stretched across 3 continents. His name graced the Forbes list and world leaders took his calls. Yet this small boy, his own flesh and blood, remained an enigma wrapped in silence. "The new speech therapist will be here Tuesday," Alexander announced to the room, though Noah didn't lift his head. "Dr. Morrison comes highly recommended. Harvard-trained, worked with the president's nephew." Noah's fingers traced invisible patterns on the Persian rug, his dark hair falling across his face like a curtain. It had been 14 months since his mother's funeral. 14 months since the car accident that stole not just Catherine Kane's life, but apparently Noah's voice along with it. The doctors found nothing physically wrong. The psychologists spoke of selective mutism, trauma responses, and patience. But Alexander Kane was not a patient man. "I have to leave for Tokyo tonight," Alexander continued, loosening his platinum tie. "Mrs. Henderson will look after you." He paused, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. "I'll bring you something special from Japan." Promises of gifts had become his default language with Noah, the only currency he knew how to offer. But his son had stopped reaching for presents months ago, just as he'd stopped reaching for everything else. 23 miles away in Brooklyn, Jasmine Williams stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. 60 days. The red letters blurred as tears threatened to spill, but she blinked them back. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with her grandmother's medical bills mounting and her own student loans crushing her chest like a weight she could never lift. "Jazz, baby girl, you okay?" Her neighbor Mrs. Patterson peeked out from the adjacent doorway, concern creasing her weathered face. "Just peachy, Mrs. P." Jasmine folded the notice carefully, tucking it into her purse next to her last $20 bill. "Landlord's just reminding me I'm popular." Mrs. Patterson's knowing smile held both wisdom and worry. "That pride of yours gonna be your downfall, child. Sometimes we gotta bend before we break." Inside her studio apartment, Jasmine sat on her second-hand couch and scrolled through her phone. The nanny agencies had few openings, and most required references she didn't have or credentials she couldn't afford. Her early childhood education degree felt worthless when employers saw her address, heard her accent, or noted the gap in her resume. But then one listing caught her eye. Immediate placement needed. Special circumstances. Excellent compensation for the right candidate. The address made her pause. Upper East Side, the kind of neighborhood where her monthly rent wouldn't cover a week's groceries for these families. But the compensation listed made her heart race, more money than she'd made in the past 6 months combined. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Keisha. "Girl, I found you something. Private family. Real money. But it's gonna be a challenge." Jasmine stared at the message, then at the eviction notice on her coffee table. She thought of her grandmother in the nursing home, of the medication costs, of the dreams she'd shelved to survive. Sometimes pride was a luxury she couldn't afford either. "Send me the details," she typed back. Back in Manhattan, Alexander reviewed the nanny applications his assistant had compiled. Princeton graduates, Swiss finishing school alumni, Women who spoke 4 languages and came with security clearances, professional, polished, perfect on paper. But none of them had succeeded with Noah. He flipped to the last application, almost missing it entirely. Jasmine Williams, Brooklyn address, state school education. But something in her cover letter made him pause. Children don't need perfection. They need someone who sees them for who they are, not who they're supposed to be. His assistant had flagged it as inappropriate, but Alexander found himself reading it twice. When had anyone ever seen Noah for who he was? When had anyone seen Alexander that way? The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times, each note echoing through the mansion's silence. Noah had been put to bed by Mrs. Henderson, the latest in a series of temporary caregivers who treated his muteness like a problem to be solved rather than a pain to be healed. Alexander walked to Noah's room, pausing at the doorway. His son lay curled in his race car bed, clutching the worn teddy bear that had belonged to his mother. It was the only toy Noah showed any attachment to. A simple brown bear that cost $12, more precious to him than the room full of treasures. "Good night, son," Alexander whispered, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. Noah didn't stir, but his small hand tightened around the bear. Across the city, Jasmine made her decision. She dialed the number from the listing, her heart hammering as it rang. Kane residence, a crisp voice answered. "Hi, I'm calling about the nanny position. My name is Jasmine Williams." Tomorrow 2 broken worlds would collide, and in the silence between them something impossible would begin to grow. The interview lasted exactly 12 minutes. Jasmine sat across from Alexander Kane in his marble-floored study, acutely aware of how her target dress looked against the Italian leather chairs. His questions came rapid-fire experience with selective mutism, educational philosophy, availability for travel. She answered honestly, watching his expression remain unreadable behind those steel-gray eyes. "The position requires discretion," Alexander said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to obedience. "Noah's condition cannot become public knowledge. The Kane family values privacy above all else." Of course. Jasmine's hands remained steady in her lap, though her heart raced. She'd Googled him after Keisha's text. Alexander Kane, CEO of Kane Industries, worth approximately $2.3 billion. His wife's death had made headlines, but the details about Noah's trauma had been carefully concealed. "He hasn't spoken since his mother's accident," Alexander continued, consulting a manila folder. "We've consulted the best specialists, Dr. Richardson at Mount Sinai, Dr. Chen from Johns Hopkins, even flew in a specialist from London. Nothing has worked." "Maybe they were trying to fix something that isn't broken," Jasmine said quietly. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Alexander's pen stopped moving across his legal pad. "Explain." "Sometimes silence isn't a problem to solve. It's a safe place someone built when the world got too loud." Jasmine met his gaze steadily. Maybe Noah doesn't need to be fixed. Maybe he just needs to be heard. For the first time since she'd arrived, Alexander's professional mask slipped slightly. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps or recognition. "You start Monday," he said. Now 3 days later, Jasmine stood outside Noah's playroom, her palms damp with nerves. Mrs. Henderson, the stern-faced housekeeper, had given her a list of rules longer than her lease agreement. No loud noises, no sudden movements, no attempts to force interaction. The boy was fragile, she'd been warned, delicate. But when Jasmine pushed open the door, she saw nothing fragile about the small figure hunched over a puzzle in the corner. Noah Kane radiated a quiet strength that reminded her of steel wrapped in velvet, unbreakable, just bent. "Hey there," she said softly, not moving from the doorway. "I'm Jasmine, but you can call me Jazz if you want." Noah's hand stilled on the puzzle piece, but he didn't look up. His dark hair fell across his face, creating a shield between himself and the world. Jasmine settled onto the floor, maintaining her distance but making herself present. The room smelled of lemon polish and loneliness. Despite the fortune and toys surrounding them, she noticed what the others had missed. Noah hadn't randomly chosen the corner. From his position he could see every entrance, every exit. He'd chosen the safest spot in the room.
"Smart place to sit," she murmured, pulling out her phone.
"Mind if I play some music? I think better with tunes." Noah's shoulders tensed slightly, but he didn't move away. Jasmine scrolled through her playlist, bypassing the upbeat songs for something gentler. The opening notes of Lean on Me drifted through the room, not the Bill Withers original, but a soft piano version her grandmother used to play. That's when it happened. Noah's head lifted just slightly, as if the melody had reached through his carefully constructed walls. His fingers, which had been gripping the puzzle piece like a lifeline, relaxed, and then so quietly Jasmine almost missed it, he began to hum. Not words, not yet, but sound, pure, raw, heartbreakingly beautiful sound that had been trapped inside him for 14 months. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to gasp, to call for Alexander to celebrate this impossible moment. Instead, she simply sat still and let Noah's humming weave through the piano notes like a prayer finally finding its voice. The music swelled, and Noah's humming grew slightly stronger. His small body began to sway, almost imperceptibly, as if the melody was moving through him like water through a desert. Tears burned Jasmine's eyes, but she blinked them back, afraid that any reaction might shatter this fragile magic. When the song ended, silence returned to the room, but it felt different now, not empty but full of possibility. Noah looked at her directly for the first time, his dark eyes, so much like his father's yet infinitely softer, meeting hers with startling intensity. In that gaze, Jasmine saw not a broken child, but a soul that had been waiting for someone to listen to his silence instead of trying to fill it. "That was beautiful," she whispered, and Noah's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. Neither of them noticed Alexander standing frozen in the doorway, his briefcase hanging forgotten from his hand. He'd returned early from his meeting, intending to check on the new nanny's first day. Instead, he'd witnessed something he'd thought impossible, his son making sound, making music, making connection. But more than that, he'd seen something in Jasmine's face as she listened to Noah's humming, the same expression Catherine used to wear when she looked at their son, not pity or professional concern, but pure unconditional love. For the first time in 14 months, Alexander Kane felt something crack open in his chest, not his walls, not yet, but a hairline fracture in the fortress he'd built around his heart. Have you ever experienced a moment when music spoke louder than words? What song holds the power to unlock your deepest emotions? Share your story in the comments below. In the playroom, Noah picked up another puzzle piece, but this time he glanced at Jasmine before placing it. An invitation, a beginning. The impossible had just become possible, and none of their lives would ever be the same. Alexander stood in his study at 11:47 p.m. staring at the security footage on his laptop screen. He'd watched the moment 17 times now, Noah's humming, that almost smile, the way his son had looked at Jasmine Williams like she held the key to a door everyone else had declared permanently locked. His fingers hovered over his phone, Dr. Richardson's number highlighted, the rational part of his mind, the part that had built an empire through logic and calculated risks, demanded an explanation. Selective mutism didn't just resolve with a playlist. There had to be a medical reason, a psychological breakthrough that could be measured, quantified, replicated. But every time he started to dial, he heard that soft humming again and his hands stilled. "Sir," his assistant Margaret's voice crackled through the intercom, "Dr. Richardson is returning your call from this afternoon." Alexander had called the specialist hours ago, in the immediate aftermath of witnessing Noah's breakthrough. Now hearing the doctor's name, something inside him recoiled. "Tell him I'll call back tomorrow," Alexander said, closing the laptop. "And Margaret, cancel my Shanghai trip. Reschedule everything for next week." The words surprised him as much as they would surprise his board of directors. Alexander Kane didn't cancel international deals for anything, but the thought of leaving now, when Noah had just taken his first step back toward the world, felt like abandonment. Upstairs, Jasmine lay awake in the guest room she'd been assigned, staring at the ceiling that probably cost more than her grandmother's entire medical bill. The events of the day played through her mind on repeat, but instead of triumph, she felt a gnawing anxiety in her stomach. It had been too easy, too perfect. Children didn't just start humming after 14 months of silence because someone played a song. She'd worked with traumatized kids before. During her practicum, real healing took months, sometimes years. What if today had been a fluke? What if tomorrow Noah retreated back into his silence and everyone realized she was just another failed experiment? Worse, what if she'd imagined the whole thing? Her phone buzzed, a text from Keisha. "Girl, how'd day one go? You taming the rich boy yet?" Jasmine stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. How could she explain what had happened without sounding delusional? "Good, kid's sweet, still figuring things out. Just remember why you're there," Keisha texted back. "Get that money and get out. Don't go catching feelings for people who ain't your people." The words hit harder than intended. Jasmine set her phone aside, but Keisha's warning echoed in her mind. She thought of the eviction notice still tucked in her purse, of her grandmother's mounting medical bills, of the electric company's final warning. She was here for survival, not to play savior to some billionaire's broken family. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the tension that had settled over the Kane mansion like a fog. Alexander left for the office before Jasmine arrived, leaving detailed instructions with Mrs. Henderson about maintaining realistic expectations and not over-interpreting isolated incidents. Jasmine found Noah in the same corner of his playroom, but something had shifted overnight. The boy who had hummed yesterday now sat rigid, his small hands clenched into fists. When she approached with her phone, ready to repeat yesterday's magic, Noah scrambled away like she was carrying fire. "Hey, it's okay," Jasmine said gently, sinking to the floor but keeping her distance. "We don't have to do music today." But Noah's retreat felt like more than simple shyness. His dark eyes, which had held such trust yesterday, now watched her with something approaching fear, as if he'd realized he'd revealed too much, shown too much of himself to a stranger. Jasmine's heart sank. She recognized the look, the same expression she'd worn at 8 years old when her caseworker had promised this foster family would be different, would be permanent. The look of a child who'd learned that opening up only led to disappointment. "You know what?" Jasmine said, settling cross-legged on the floor. "I think I'll just sit here for a while. You don't have to do anything. Don't have to talk or hum or even look at me. Sometimes it's nice to just be quiet together." She pulled out a book, not a children's story, but a worn copy of Maya Angelou's poetry. She began reading silently, her lips moving slightly with the words creating presence without pressure. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Noah remained pressed against the wall, but gradually his defensive posture began to soften. His fists unclenched, his breathing slowed. That's when Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, her expression sharp with disapproval. "Miss Williams," Mr. Kane called. "He wants a full report on any unusual behaviors. He's concerned about yesterday's incident being taken out of context." The words were clearly intended for Noah to hear, and their effect was immediate. The boy's shoulders hunched inward, his face flushing with what looked like shame, as if his moment of breakthrough had been wrong, inappropriate, something to be contained and explained away. Jasmine's temper flared, but she kept her voice level. "I'll speak with Mr. Kane directly. He also wanted me to remind you that Noah has a session with Dr. Richardson this afternoon. The doctor will want to assess any changes in his condition." After Mrs. Henderson left, the playroom felt smaller, more oppressive. Noah had retreated fully into himself again, his brief emergence yesterday now seeming like a cruel mirage. Jasmine closed her book and looked at the small boy who had trusted her for one perfect moment before the adult world had convinced him it was safer to stay silent. "Noah," she said quietly, "sometimes grown-ups get scared when kids start growing. They want to put everything in neat little boxes with labels. But you know what? Your voice belongs to you, not to doctors or teachers or even your dad. When you're ready to use it again, if you're ready, that's your choice, nobody else's." Noah's eyes flickered toward her, and for just a second she saw a flash of the boy who had hummed along to her grandmother's favorite song. But then his gaze dropped to the floor and the walls went back up. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away yesterday's hope and leaving only the complicated truth that healing was never a straight line. And sometimes the people who love you most are the ones most afraid to let you change. The storm hit at 3:17 p.m. Just as Dr. Richardson was packing up his briefcase with a fresh diagnosis and a new prescription. Noah had spent the entire session in complete silence, refusing to engage with the doctor's tests, puzzles, or gentle prodding. The specialist had left with furrowed brows and recommendations for more intensive intervention. Alexander stood at the window of his study, watching the wind bend the Central Park trees into impossible angles. The Weather Service was calling it a historic storm system, the kind that shut down the city and trapped everyone exactly where they were. "Sir," Margaret's voice came through his phone. "All flights are grounded. The highways are closed. I've had to cancel your dinner with the Singapore investors." Alexander should have felt frustrated. Instead, he experienced something unfamiliar, relief. For the first time in months, he had no choice but to stay home. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Kane," Jasmine's voice carried through the door, tentative but determined. "Could I speak with you?" She entered looking smaller somehow, her usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. The afternoon session with Dr. Richardson had shaken her. Watching the man treat Noah like a fascinating specimen rather than a hurting child had ignited every protective instinct she possessed. "Dr. Richardson thinks Noah needs residential treatment," Alexander said without preamble, not turning from the window. "Somewhere he can receive intensive therapy, away from distractions." The word hung between them like an accusation. Jasmine understood immediately. She was the distraction. The woman who had somehow coaxed sound from his son was now being branded as an obstacle to proper treatment. He hummed, Jasmine said quietly. Yesterday Noah hummed. That wasn't nothing. Dr. Richardson says isolated incidents can be misleading, that we shouldn't read too much into. Stop. The word came out sharper than Jasmine intended. Just stop hiding behind what Dr. Richardson says and tell me what you think. Alexander finally turned, his steel-gray eyes meeting hers with startling intensity. For a moment his corporate mask slipped completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. I think, he said slowly, that I've been watching my son disappear for 14 months, and yesterday I saw him for the first time since his mother died, and that terrifies me more than any business deal I've ever negotiated. The honesty in his voice hit Jasmine like a physical blow. She'd expected defensiveness, corporate doublespeak, maybe even dismissal. She hadn't expected this, a father's raw confession of his own fear. Lightning illuminated the room, followed immediately by thunder that shook the mansion's windows. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Backup generators should kick in, Alexander said, but minutes passed in darkness and silence. That's when they heard it, a small, frightened cry from upstairs. They moved toward Noah's room without discussion, Alexander grabbing a flashlight from his desk. They found the boy huddled in his bed, clutching his mother's teddy bear as lightning continued to strobe outside his windows. Hey baby, Jasmine whispered, settling on the edge of his bed without hesitation. Storms are scary, huh? Noah's wide eyes found hers in the flashlight's glow, and to her surprise he scooted closer. Not much, just a few inches, but enough that his small shoulder touched her arm. Alexander stood in the doorway, flashlight in hand, watching his son seek comfort from this woman he'd known for barely 2 days. When had Noah last reached for anyone? When had Alexander last been the one his son turned to for safety? Power's out all over the city, Alexander said, checking his phone. Could be hours before it's restored. Another crash of thunder sent Noah pressing closer to Jasmine, and she made a decision that would have terrified her yesterday. Want to build a fort? Sometimes storms feel less scary when you have walls around you. For the next hour, the three of them worked together in the soft glow of flashlights and candles. Alexander found himself following Jasmine's lead as they draped sheets over chairs, securing corners with books from Noah's shelves. The billionaire CEO who commanded board meetings was taking direction from a nanny from Brooklyn, and somehow it felt perfectly natural. My grandmother used to tell me storms were just the sky having big feelings, Jasmine said as they settled into their makeshift fort. Sometimes feelings get so big they need to make noise. Noah nestled between them on pillows, looked up at her with those serious dark eyes. What kind of big feelings? Alexander found himself asking, drawn into the intimate circle of candlelight and whispered conversation. All kinds. Happy ones, sad ones, scared ones, sometimes angry ones. Jasmine's voice grew softer. My grandmother said it was okay to have big feelings. Better to let them out than keep them locked up inside where they can't breathe. The words settled over them like a benediction. Outside, the storm continued its emotional display, but inside their cloth walls something fragile and precious was taking root. Alexander watched his son's eyelids grow heavy, watched the way Noah's small hand had somehow found its way to Jasmine's wrist, anchoring himself to her presence. When had he last seen his son look so peaceful? He trusts you, Alexander said quietly, his voice barely audible over the rain. He trusts you too, Jasmine replied, nodding toward Noah's other hand which had unconsciously reached for his father's sleeve. He's just scared to show it. Alexander looked down at his son's fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt. Such a small gesture, but the first voluntary contact Noah had initiated in months. His throat tightened with emotions he'd successfully buried for over a year. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, the words escaping before he could stop them. I know how to run companies, negotiate deals, manage portfolios, but I don't know how to help my own son. In the candlelight, Jasmine saw past the billionaire facade to the scared father underneath. Maybe that's okay, she whispered. Maybe he doesn't need you to have all the answers. Maybe he just needs you to sit in the storm with him. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, but inside their small sanctuary, 3 broken pieces of different puzzles had found a way to fit together, if only for one storm-tossed night. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming. Power had been restored just before dawn, but the 3 of them had remained in their makeshift fort until Noah woke naturally, curled against Jasmine's side with his father's hand resting protectively on his small back. Now 2 hours later, Alexander found himself in unfamiliar territory, sitting at his kitchen island, a space he'd never used, watching Jasmine make pancakes, while Noah perched on a stool nearby, still silent but more present than he'd been in months. "You don't have to do this," Alexander said, gesturing at the domestic scene that felt both foreign and strangely right in his sterile mansion. "Everyone needs breakfast," Jasmine replied, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. "Besides, cooking helps me think." Alexander studied her profile, noting the way her movements held an easy confidence that spoke of experience beyond her years. "You're good with him, more than good. It's like you understand something the rest of us are missing." Jasmine's hands stilled on the spatula. She'd been dreading this conversation, the inevitable questions about her background, her qualifications, her secrets. Rich people always wanted explanations for things that couldn't be bought or taught. "My baby brother used to have nightmares," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "After our mom died, he stopped talking for a while too." The simple words carried weight that made Alexander look up sharply. "I didn't know you had a brother." Had the past tense hung heavy between them. "Jalen, he was 4 when mom passed. I was 12. She kept her eyes on the pancakes, using the routine motions to steady herself. "Foster care doesn't always keep families together." Alexander felt something cold settle in his stomach. "They separated you. Different homes. I was too old for most families, and Jalen was more adoptable without a teenage sister complicating things." Jasmine's laugh held no humor. "I got to visit him once a month, if the families allowed it, watched him fade a little more each time." Noah had gone very still, his dark eyes fixed on Jasmine's face with an intensity that suggested he understood more than anyone realized. "He never spoke again," Jasmine continued, her voice growing quieter. "Not to me anyway. His new family said he was doing better, that he was adjusting, but I could see it in his eyes, the same look Noah had yesterday when Mrs. Henderson mentioned the doctor. Like he'd learned that showing your real feelings just gives people more ways to hurt you." She turned to face Alexander fully, her eyes bright with unshed tears but her voice steady. "Jalen died in a car accident when he was 8, 4 years of silence, and I never got to hear his voice again. Never got to tell him that it was okay to feel big feelings, that he didn't have to be perfect to deserve love." The kitchen fell silent, except for the soft sizzle of pancakes on the griddle. Alexander felt the weight of her revelation settling over him like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just professional expertise. This was personal mission, born from a grief that mirrored his own. "Is that why you became a nanny?" he asked softly. "Is that why you buy him toys instead of talking to him?" she countered, not unkindly. The question hit like a physical blow. Alexander's jaw tightened, and for a moment Jasmine thought she'd pushed too hard too fast. But then his shoulders sagged, and she saw the man beneath the billionaire armor. "Catherine was the one who knew how to reach him," Alexander said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She could make him laugh, calm his fears, understand what he needed without him having to ask. I was always peripheral, the provider, the one who worked late so she could be the one who mattered." He stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the garden where Noah's swing set sat unused. "The night she died, we'd fought, about my travel schedule, about missing his school play again. She was driving to her sister's house because she needed space from me." His reflection in the glass looked haunted. "If I'd been a better husband, a better father, she never would have been on that road." Jasmine turned off the burner, her heart aching for this man who'd been carrying such crushing guilt. "Alexander. The last thing she said to me was that Noah deserved a father who was present, not just financially supportive. And now," he pressed his palm against the window, "now I don't know how to be present without her to show me how." A small sound made them both turn. Noah had slipped off his stool and was standing in the middle of the kitchen, his teddy bear clutched against his chest. His eyes moved between the two adults, and Jasmine realized he'd been absorbing every word of their conversation. "Noah," she said gently. The boy took 2 careful steps toward his father, then stopped. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Alexander held his breath. And then, in a voice like rusty hinges finally opening, Noah whispered, "Daddy sad?" The words hit Alexander like lightning. He dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he gathered his son into his arms. "Yes," he whispered against Noah's hair. "Daddy's been very sad, but hearing your beautiful voice, Noah, you just made everything better." Jasmine watched father and son hold each other, both crying now, both finally letting their big feelings out where they could breathe. She thought of Jalen, of all the conversations they'd never had, all the healing that had never come. But this was different. This was hope taking root in the ruins of 2 broken hearts, watered by truth and tended by love. Pancakes are ready, she said softly, giving them space but not leaving entirely. Because sometimes the most important healing happened around kitchen tables over simple meals shared by people brave enough to let their walls come down. The following 2 weeks transformed the Kane mansion in ways that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with laughter. Noah's voice, once freed, seemed to make up for lost time. It started with whispered single words, yes, please, more, but gradually blossomed into full sentences, observations, and even the occasional giggle that echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long. Jazz, look, Noah called from the garden, where he was feeding ducks at the small pond. Alexander had never noticed his son enjoyed. The mama duck has babies. Jasmine smiled from her spot on the garden bench, watching Noah's face light up with pure joy. Beside her, Alexander lowered his laptop, a sight that would have shocked his entire board of directors. The man who used to schedule bathroom breaks was now taking lunch hours in his own backyard. 6 ducklings, Alexander observed, moving to crouch beside his son. What should we name them? Can I really name them? Noah's eyes went wide with the kind of wonder that reminded Alexander just how young his son still was. Your garden, your ducks, your rules, Alexander said, and the smile Noah gave him was worth more than any corporate acquisition he'd ever negotiated. Over the past 14 days, Alexander had discovered things about his son that amazed him. Noah was fascinated by patterns in music, in nature, in the way light moved across the wall. He remembered every story Jasmine told him with perfect detail. He had his mother's gentle heart, but also a quiet strength that was uniquely his own. And Alexander had learned things about Jasmine that made his chest tight in ways that had nothing to do with business stress. She hummed while she cooked, unconsciously swaying to rhythms only she could hear. She remembered how everyone liked their coffee, even Mrs. Henderson, who'd thawed considerably under Jasmine's patient kindness. She left little notes in Noah's lunchbox, drew pictures on his napkins, and somehow made every ordinary moment feel like a small celebration. Daddy, Jazz says her grandmama taught her to make music with water glasses, Noah announced, tugging on Alexander's sleeve. Can we try? Can we what now? Alexander looked to Jasmine, who was trying to hide her smile behind her hand. It's simple, she said, standing and brushing grass from her sundress. You just need different amounts of water and… I know how it works, Alexander interrupted, then caught her surprised expression. I took piano lessons as a child. Before my father decided they were impractical. Something flickered in Jasmine's eyes, understanding maybe or recognition of a kindred wound. When's the last time you played? 20 years? Maybe more. Alexander surprised himself by feeling wistful rather than dismissive. An hour later, the 3 of them sat around the kitchen island with 8 water glasses filled to different levels, producing a makeshift symphony that sounded absolutely terrible and felt absolutely perfect. Noah's laughter bubbled over as Alexander attempted Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and hit every wrong note possible. Daddy's not very good, Noah whispered conspiratorially to Jasmine, loud enough for Alexander to hear. Hey, Alexander protested, but he was laughing too. When had he last laughed like this? When had his face hurt from smiling? Maybe Jazz can teach you, Noah suggested innocently. She's really good at teaching. Alexander caught Jasmine's eye across the table and felt something electric pass between them. She'd been teaching him, he realized, not just about Noah, but about how to be present, how to find joy in small moments, how to let his guard down without the world ending. I think, Jasmine said softly, your daddy just needed to remember it's okay to play off-key sometimes. That evening, after Noah had been tucked into bed with 3 stories and promises of more duck naming tomorrow, Alexander found Jasmine on the terrace overlooking the garden. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, looking out at the city lights that sparkled like earthbound stars. Thank you, he said simply, joining her at the railing. For what? For giving me my son back, for giving him his voice, for… Alexander struggled with words that felt too big, too vulnerable, for showing me what I was missing. Jasmine turned to face him, her expression soft in the moonlight. You didn't miss anything, you were just scared. Sometimes when we love someone so much and we've already lost so much, we build walls to protect what's left, even if those walls end up keeping out the very connection we're trying to preserve. Alexander stepped closer, drawn by her warmth, her wisdom, her incredible ability to see through his defenses to the man underneath. And what about your walls? What about them? You've spent 2 weeks healing my family, but who heals you? The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. Jasmine's breath caught as Alexander reached up to trace a gentle finger along her cheek. What's the most unexpected place you've found healing? Sometimes our greatest teachers come disguised as the people we think we're supposed to help. Share in the comments a time when helping someone else ended up healing you too. Alexander, she whispered, but she didn't step away. I know this is complicated, he said. I know there are 100 reasons this is a terrible idea. But Jasmine, these past 2 weeks, you've brought light back into our lives, into my life. And the kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than a statement. When Jasmine kissed him back, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never known she was looking for. They broke apart slowly, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. This changes everything, Jasmine murmured. I know. You're bored, the media, the difference in our worlds. I know. She pulled back to meet his eyes. Do you, really? Because I'm not some fantasy, Alexander. I'm a woman from Brooklyn with student loans and a grandmother in a nursing home and a history that doesn't fit into your world. When people find out about us, let me worry about my world, Alexander said, cupping her face in his hands. Right now, all I care about is this. You, me, Noah, the family we're becoming. Above them, Noah's bedroom window glowed softly, and inside, a little boy slept peacefully for the first time in over a year, dreaming of duck families and water music and the sound of his father's laughter. For this perfect moment, everything felt possible. But in the distance, storm clouds were already gathering, and not all storms brought families together. The photograph appeared on page 6 at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Alexander Kane and his mystery nanny sharing an intimate moment on his terrace, Noah visible through the window behind them. The headline screamed, "Billionaire's baby mama, Kane Industries CEO caught in scandalous affair with employee." Alexander's phone started ringing before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. Margaret's voice was tight with controlled panic. Sir, we have a situation. The board is calling an emergency meeting. Social media is exploding, and there are news vans outside the mansion gates. Jasmine found out when Mrs. Henderson burst into the kitchen, her face flushed with indignation and something that looked suspiciously like excitement. Miss Williams, you need to see this. She thrust her tablet forward, showing not just one photo, but dozens compiled from paparazzi shots taken over the past 2 weeks. The narrative they painted was damning. The opportunistic nanny seducing her wealthy employer while using his traumatized son as a pathway to fortune. How did they get these? Jasmine whispered, scrolling through images of private moments that should have been theirs alone. Noah feeding ducks while she and Alexander watched lovingly, the three of them building their blanket fort, her and Alexander's first kiss. Someone's been watching, Mrs. Henderson said grimly. Someone with a telephoto lens and a bank account that just got very healthy. Noah appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas, drawn by the tension crackling through the house like electricity before a storm. Jazz, why do you look scared? Before Jasmine could answer, Alexander strode into the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear, his face a mask of corporate steel she hadn't seen in weeks. I don't care what the stock price is doing, Margaret. Handle it. He ended the call and looked at Jasmine with eyes that had gone cold and distant. We need to talk privately. The transformation was instantaneous and brutal. The warm, vulnerable man who had kissed her under the stars had vanished, replaced by the billionaire CEO who commanded empires and crushed obstacles. Jasmine felt her heart sink into her stomach. Alexander, she began. Not here. His voice cut through her words like ice. My study now. Noah's small hand slipped into hers as they walked through the mansion's halls past windows where camera flashes were already visible beyond the gates. Are the camera people mad at us? He whispered. No, baby, they're just confused. Jasmine managed, though her own confusion was rapidly crystallizing into dread. In the study, Alexander closed the door with a controlled violence that made Jasmine flinch. When he turned to face her, she barely recognized him. Did you know? His voice was quiet, lethal. Know what? Did you know someone was watching us? Taking pictures? Alexander moved behind his desk, putting the massive piece of furniture between them like a barricade, because the timing is awfully convenient. Rural nanny gets close to billionaire and his son. Cameras mysteriously appear just as things get serious. The accusation hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Are you seriously asking me if I orchestrated this? I'm asking if you've been playing a longer game than I realized. Jasmine stared at him, searching for any trace of the man who had held her while Noah hummed in their blanket fort. You think I'm some kind of gold digger? That I manipulated Noah's trauma to get to you? The thought has occurred to me. Alexander's voice was clinical, detached. You certainly knew which buttons to push. The music, the stories about your brother, the way you made yourself indispensable to my son. Stop. Jasmine's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare cheapen what happened between us. Don't you dare suggest that Noah's healing was some kind of con. Noah was speaking to you within days, Jasmine. Days. After 14 months of silence. That's either a miracle or a very sophisticated manipulation. The words struck her like bullets, each one designed to wound. Jasmine felt something vital breaking inside her chest, not just her heart but her faith in the man she'd fallen in love with. You know what the real tragedy is, she said, her voice deadly quiet. It's not the cameras or the headlines, or even the fact that you just accused me of exploiting a traumatized child. It's that after everything we've shared, everything we've built, you still don't really know me at all. I know you're from Brooklyn with student loans and medical bills. I know you needed this job desperately. I know. You know facts. Jasmine exploded, her composure finally shattering. But you don't know me because if you knew me, really knew me, you'd know I would die before I hurt that little boy. You'd know that loving you and Noah was the most real thing I've ever felt. And you'd know that I'm walking away right now not because I'm guilty, but because I can't stay with someone who thinks so little of me. Alexander's mask cracked for just a moment, revealing the terrified man underneath. Jasmine, wait. No. She moved toward the door, her dignity the only armor she had left. You want to know what I think happened? I think someone saw your walls coming down, saw you becoming human again, and decided that was bad for business. So they made sure the world would see me as the villain, and you as the victim, and you just played right into their hands. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. I'll be gone within the hour. Tell Noah, tell him his voice is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, and no one can ever take that away from him. Jasmine. But she was already gone, leaving Alexander alone in his study, with the taste of ashes in his mouth, and the sound of his empire crumbling around him. Outside, Noah sat on the stairs, his teddy bear clutched tight, having heard enough to understand that his world was breaking apart again. When Jasmine found him there 20 minutes later, her suitcase in hand, they looked at each other with matching heartbreak. I have to go, baby, she whispered, kneeling beside him. Because of the camera people? Because sometimes grown-ups make everything too complicated. She kissed his forehead, breathing in his little boy scent one last time. But remember what I told you, your voice belongs to you. Don't let anyone make you forget how to use it. As her taxi pulled away from the mansion, Jasmine didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see the windows that had become home, or the man who had just chosen fear over faith. Behind those windows, Alexander stood frozen, watching the best thing that had ever happened to his family disappear into Brooklyn traffic, and wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The shatter was complete. Now came the choice, would love be strong enough to put the pieces back together? 3 days had passed since the photographs hit the tabloids. 3 days since Alexander's world had imploded in a cascade of headlines. Billionaire's nanny, gold digger or true love. Kane Hare's mysterious mutism cured by controversial caregiver. From Brooklyn to billions. The Cinderella scandal. The board meeting had been brutal. Emergency sessions, whispered conversations about stability and public image, thinly veiled ultimatums wrapped in corporate speak. Alexander sat in his study now, staring at the resignation letter Jasmine had left on his desk before disappearing back to Brooklyn without a word. This was always going to end this way. I was fooling myself to think otherwise. Noah is speaking now. My job is done. Thank you for letting me be part of his healing. Please don't try to find me. The words felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Outside, Noah's voice drifted through the window as Mrs. Henderson tried unsuccessfully to engage him in the garden. His son had barely spoken since Jasmine left, and the light that had returned to his eyes was already dimming. Alexander's phone buzzed, another message from his crisis management team, another strategy for containing the narrative. Delete the photographs from social media. Issue a statement about professional boundaries. Distance himself from the Brooklyn nanny who had somehow become public enemy #1 overnight. His finger hovered over the delete button on a photo. TMZ had obtained him and Jasmine and Noah building a snowman last week, all three of them laughing, looking like an actual family. The image that had caused such scandal was also the happiest he'd looked in years. 23 miles away, Jasmine sat on her grandmother's nursing home bed, holding weathered hands that felt like paper birds. Baby girl, you've been crying for 3 days straight, Grandmama said, her voice still strong despite her failing body. Either tell me what's wrong or stop soaking my good pillow. Jasmine managed a watery laugh. I did something stupid, Grandmama. I fell in love with someone I had no business loving. That rich man and his boy you've been telling me about. How did you? Child, I've been listening to you talk about them for weeks. The way your voice changes when you mention that little one, the way you light up talking about teaching him music. Grandmom's knowing eyes crinkled, and I seen how you glow when you mention his daddy. Question is, what's so stupid about love? Jasmine pulled out her phone, showing her grandmother the brutal headlines, the cruel comments, the photos that had been dissected and mocked across social media. Look at what they're saying about me, about us. Gold digger, opportunist, predator. Grandmama studied the screen with the gravity of a judge, then handed the phone back. And what does your heart say? My heart doesn't matter. This is his world and I don't fit in it. I never did. Grandma leaned back against her pillows. You know what I told your mama when she wanted to marry your daddy? I said, baby, love don't care about what fits. Love makes its own space. But the media, his board, the pressure makes diamonds, child. Question is what you got real enough to withstand the heat? Before Jasmine could answer, her phone rang. Alexander's name appeared on the screen for the dozenth time in 3 days. She'd been ignoring his calls, his texts, the flowers he'd sent that she'd given to the nurses. Answer it, Grandmama said firmly. I can't. You can. And you will. Because that man is probably sitting somewhere tearing himself apart, and that little boy is wondering why the woman who gave him his voice just disappeared without saying goodbye. Jasmine's thumb trembled as she accepted the call. Jasmine. Alexander's voice was rough, desperate. Thank God. Please don't hang up. Alexander, I can't do this. Noah won't speak, he said, cutting her off. He's retreating again, and I don't know how to stop it. Her heart clenched. He just needs time. This whole situation is probably confusing for him. He needs you. Alexander's voice cracked. We both do. I don't care about the headlines or the board or any of it. I only care about my family, and that includes you. Your family? Jasmine's voice was barely a whisper. I'm holding my resignation letter, Alexander said, from my own company. I wrote it this morning. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I spent 14 months watching my son disappear, and 2 weeks watching him come back to life because of you. I'm not losing either of you to protect a reputation that means nothing without the people I love. Jasmine's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face, as Grandmama nodded approvingly. But your empire, everything you've built, means nothing if I'm building it alone. Alexander's voice grew stronger, more certain. I love you, Jasmine Williams. I love your strength, your heart, your ability to see light in dark places. I love the way you make Noah laugh, and the way you make me want to be the man I never knew I could be. When have you had to choose between what the world expected of you and what your heart knew was right? What did you choose, and do you regret it? Share your story of choosing love over fear. I love you too, Jasmine whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. But love isn't always enough. Sometimes the world, then we change the world, Alexander said simply. One conversation, one story, one moment of truth at a time. But we do it together, all three of us. Grandmama squeezed Jasmine's hand, her eyes bright with tears and pride. Come home, Alexander pleaded. Please, just come home. For the first time in 3 days, Jasmine felt something stronger than fear bloom in her chest. Hope. I'll be there in an hour, she whispered. The choice had been made. Now came the hard part, building a life brave enough to hold this much love. Jasmine's key turned in the mansion's front door just as the sun was setting, painting the marble foyer in shades of gold and amber. The house felt different, not empty, but waiting, as if it had been holding its breath until she returned. She found them in Noah's playroom, father and son sitting on the floor with a half-completed puzzle between them. Noah looked up first, his dark eyes widening with an emotion too complex for his 6 years. Jazz. His voice was small, uncertain, as if he wasn't sure she was real. Hey baby, she said, kneeling down to his level. I'm sorry I left without saying goodbye. That was wrong of me. Noah launched himself into her arms with such force it nearly knocked her over. I thought you weren't coming back, he whispered against her neck. I thought I made you sad like I made mommy sad. Jasmine's heart shattered and mended simultaneously. She pulled back to meet his eyes, her hands framing his small face. Oh Noah, you didn't make mommy sad. You could never make anyone sad just by being yourself. What happened to mommy wasn't your fault. And me leaving wasn't your fault either. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes when they're scared. Were you scared of the camera people? Noah asked with the intuitive wisdom that children possess. Yes, I was. But I'm not scared anymore. She looked over Noah's head to meet Alexander's eyes. Because I remembered something important. Love is braver than fear. Alexander stood moving toward them with careful steps, as if approaching something precious he was afraid to break. The board voted, he said quietly. Jasmine's stomach dropped. And Hyde? They asked for my resignation. Alexander's mouth curved into a smile that held no bitterness, only liberation, so I gave it to them. Alexander, no. It's already done. I'm keeping my shares, but I'm stepping down as CEO. Margaret's been wanting more responsibility anyway. She'll do brilliantly. He knelt beside them, completing their small circle. I've spent so many years building an empire, I forgot to build a life. I don't want to make that mistake anymore. But what will you do? I've been thinking about that. Alexander reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind Jasmine's ear, his touch gentle and sure. There's this foundation I started years ago after Catherine died, to help children with trauma. It's been running on autopilot, but I think it's time I gave it my full attention. Maybe we could help other families find their voices too. The idea bloomed between them like a flower reaching towards sunlight. Jasmine could see it, the programs they could create, the children they could reach, the healing they could facilitate together. We, she whispered. If you'll have us, all of us, permanently. Alexander pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and Jasmine's breath caught. I know it's been a whirlwind, and I know the timing isn't traditional, but nothing about us has been traditional. Jasmine Williams, will you marry me? Will you be Noah's mother and my partner and help us build something beautiful together? The ring was simple, elegant, a single diamond that caught the evening light like captured starfire. But more beautiful than any jewel was the hope shining in both father and son's eyes as they waited for her answer. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, yes, absolutely yes. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger as Noah cheered and threw his arms around both of them. They stayed there wrapped in each other in golden light, until Noah pulled back with a mischievous grin. Can we have the wedding in the garden, with the ducks? Alexander and Jasmine laughed, the sound echoing through the mansion and chasing away the last shadows of loneliness. 6 months later, they did exactly that. The wedding was small, intimate, just family and the friends who mattered. Mrs. Henderson wept openly. Grandma sat in the front row wearing her best hat and brightest smile, and Noah served as ring-bearer with the kind of serious dignity that made every guest's heart melt. But the most magical moment came during the reception, as golden hour light filtered through the garden, and the photographer had finally stopped clicking. Jasmine found herself alone for a moment by the duck pond watching the 6 ducklings, now nearly grown, paddle behind their mother. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to her wedding playlist, letting the soft piano notes of Lean on Me drift across the water, the same song that had unlocked Noah's voice all those months ago. That's when she heard it, a gentle humming harmonizing perfectly with the melody. She turned to find Alexander approaching, Noah's hand in his, both of them humming along to the music that had started everything. Other guests began to notice, drawn by the sweet sound of family finding its voice. Noah looked up at Jasmine with eyes that sparkled with mischief and love. Jazz? Yes, baby. I think the mama duck likes our song. He pointed to the pond where the duck family had indeed swum closer as if drawn by the melody. I think she does too, Jasmine agreed, pulling both her boys close. As the sun set over their new life together, 3 voices rose in harmony, imperfect, unrehearsed, absolutely beautiful. The billionaire's son who couldn't speak had found not just his voice, but his family. The nanny from Brooklyn had found not just love, but her home. And the father who had lost everything had discovered that sometimes the greatest wealth was measured not in dollars but in the sound of laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent too long. What moment in your life taught you that love really can conquer all? When did you realize that the greatest treasures can't be bought, only discovered in the hearts of people who truly see you? Share your story of finding family in unexpected places. The impossible had become inevitable, and every hummed note carried the promise that some stories, the ones born from genuine love, really do have happily ever afters. In the distance, the city lights began to twinkle like earthbound stars, witness to a love that had indeed changed the world, one heart at a time.
A tale of healing, hope, and the music that lives in every heart if only we're brave enough to let it play. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Thank you for watching this story to the end.